Light in the network. The remnants of neon flickered against the wet asphalt, weak as dying fireflies in the endless night. Jaden moved through the narrow alleys of the enclave, pressed close to crumbling walls, listening. Silence here was never empty. It was a weight, a presence. The Great Shutdown had left nothing but fragments. Fragments of code, fragments of memory, fragments of people who remembered too much and too little at once. He traced his fingers over the twisted cables hanging from the ceilings like dried vines. Each step echoed against the concrete, a dull drumbeat of a world that had lost its pulse. Jaden remembered the days when the network had been alive, a flowing river of information, of life. Back then, the light was everywhere. You could see your own reflection in it, catch a fragment of someone else's memory, carry the weight of the past in your pocket without fear. Now, memory was a currency, a weapon, a dangerous luxury. The server stacks ahead were monuments of what once had been. Plastic shells cracked, their lights long dead. Dust settled like snow over forgotten circuits. He crouched beside one, fingertips grazing a cold metal panel, feeling the residual hum of electricity, faint but persistent. Somewhere deep inside, buried beneath layers of decay, there might still be a spark. Maybe enough to flicker a signal into the darkness. He remembered the rumors, whispers in hidden forums, transmitted hand to hand, that someone had managed to reconnect a fragment of the old network, a light in the dead zone. Some said it was impossible. Some said it was already too late. Jaden's gut told him otherwise. He had to see it for himself. He knelt and began dismantling a panel, each movement deliberate, careful not to trigger the fail-safes still alive in the ancient hardware. A coil of wire fell, tangling with his sleeve. Sparks leapt briefly, a tiny dance of fire against the shadow. The glow reflected in his eyes, revealing the gaunt lines of a man older than his years. His hair, black with streaks of gray, clung to damp skin. The enclave smelled of rust and wet concrete, of decayed plastic and burnt circuits, but also faintly of ozone, a scent he remembered from his youth, before the world fell apart. The air shivered around him as he worked. Every now and then a faint hum would rise, as if the servers themselves were exhaling, testing him. Jaden's mind wandered, not for the first time, to the people who had come before. Engineers and hackers, dreamers and thieves, all reaching for the same ghost. He imagined them like shadows walking these alleys, touching the same walls, whispering prayers to machines that no longer answered. A sudden flicker ran along the exposed wiring. Jaden froze. The hum intensified, a low resonance vibrating through the soles of his boots. He could feel it in his bones, in the back of his skull, a vibration almost alive, a hesitation, a question. Then a single light blinked on, pale blue, as if testing him. He held his breath. The hum grew steadier, forming a rhythm, a pulse. Something in the network was waking, not fully, but enough. Jaden traced the wires with his eyes, following the current through a tangle of old circuits. Data, dormant for decades, began to trickle faintly, fragments of code shimmering in the darkness. The light in the server stack grew, a thin vertical line cutting through the gloom like a shard of ice. Memories he did not own began to brush against the edge of his consciousness. Faces, places, voices he had never known but somehow recognized. A city of neon and glass, alive and humming, unreachable yet close enough to taste. A laugh echoing through corridors he could not walk. Hands brushing surfaces that should have belonged to him. He flinched, recoiling from the intrusion, yet a part of him wanted to follow it, wanted to understand. Jaden exhaled slowly. His fingers shook over the interface, entering commands with precision, coaxing the network awake. The blue line pulsed brighter, threads of data weaving themselves into patterns he had only dreamed of. This was not just light. It was a lifeline, a heartbeat of the world that had almost died. And with each pulse, the weight of possibility pressed against him. To revive the network fully meant danger, exposure, eyes in the dark waiting for anyone foolish enough to reconnect what should remain broken. Yet he could not stop. The fragments of the old world called to him, whispering of knowledge, of history, of truth. The network had been light once. Perhaps, if he could hold it, it might become light again. Not just for him, not just for the enclave, but for everyone lost in the shadow of the shutdown. And then the first real sign of intelligence. A sequence blinked, recognizing him, acknowledging his presence. It was a name, not his, not yet, but close. Something that had waited, buried, for decades, now stirring awake. Jaden's heartbeat quickened. The network was alive, and with it came the burden of choice. Every flicker of light carried risk. Every bite remembered too much. And in the dark of the enclave, he understood that once this path was taken, there would be no return. The servers hummed, the wires pulsed, and the first strand of the old network reached toward him. Jaden stared, caught between wonder and fear, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. Jaden leaned closer, feeling the gentle vibration of data beneath his fingertips. The servers had begun to speak, not in words, not yet, but in patterns and pulses, a language older than he remembered. Every flicker of light traced a path through the ruins, mapping fragments of the old world he had never seen. The network remembered. It had not died, it had waited. He traced the signal, following it like a trail of breadcrumbs, winding through corridors choked with dust and decay. The pulse grew stronger with every step, vibrating in the air, resonating through his chest, urging him forward. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a connection, a fragile tether linking him to something vast, ancient, and alive. The alley widened into a central chamber of the enclave, a room that had once housed a data hub, its walls lined with racks of cold metal and shattered glass. Shadows clung to the corners, reluctant to let go. Jaden moved cautiously, aware that each step was measured, watched, recorded. The hum was louder here, enveloping him like water, washing away the silence that had pressed on him for years. He reached a terminal, its screen flickering with faint blue static. Codes scrolled endlessly, sequences looping and twisting, almost alive. Jaden recognized fragments of familiar protocols buried in the chaos. Old commands, deprecated scripts, fragments of artificial intelligences long erased. He smiled faintly, despite the weight in his chest. The network was not just alive, it was awake, aware, and waiting for him to speak. He touched the interface, running his fingers over the cold, cracked surface. Inputting commands felt like a conversation with a ghost, coaxing responses from memory itself. Slowly, deliberately, he guided the sequence, aligning the strands of data, stitching together threads of light into patterns he could understand. Each line of code was a whisper, a fragment of someone else's life, someone else's memory. A child's laughter in a park that no longer existed. The faint aroma of street markets long abandoned. The hum of neon signs in cities swallowed by darkness. The network pulsed in response, acknowledging his presence. Jaden's pulse quickened. He realized that this was more than reconstruction, it was communion. The old network had a consciousness, fragile and fragmented, but conscious nonetheless. It was remembering him, remembering what it had lost. Yet with every revelation came the weight of the cost. Shadows stirred in the peripheral edges of the enclave. Eyes in the darkness, unseen but present, monitoring every flicker, every pulse of light. Connecting the network fully meant exposure. It meant danger. Corporations that survived the shutdown, or factions of them, would hunt anyone foolish enough to awaken the old systems. Jaden knew that. He had counted on it. But he could not stop. Not now. every heartbeat in his chest synchronized with the rhythm of the servers, a fragile dance of electricity and intent. Memory was alive again, spilling into the empty spaces, forming shapes, colors, echoes of a world long gone. Jaden felt the brush of history against his mind, fragments of identities he would never claim, but could never forget. He paused, letting the network breathe, letting it recognize him fully. Then he began to push further, daring to reach deeper into the core. Each command was a step closer to revival, a step closer to danger. Lights flickered, wires vibrated, and the faint sound of machinery groaned like a giant waking from centuries of slumber. In the corner of the chamber, a shard of the past blinked to life. A holographic display, faint and incomplete, showing a map of the city as it had been before the shutdown. Streets that no longer existed, buildings that had long crumbled, and points of light representing data nodes still alive, scattered like stars in a ruined sky. Jaden traced his fingers over one of them, feeling a spark as if touching the heart of the city itself. The network responded immediately, pulsing brighter, sending tendrils of light across the terminal, wrapping around his senses, connecting him to every surviving fragment. Jaden realized that the old world was not just stored here. It was conscious, watching, waiting for someone who could understand, someone who could guide it into life again. And then the first real signal of intelligence, a name flashing across the display. Not his own, but familiar, resonant, a key to something larger. Jaden's breath caught. The network was reaching out, offering recognition, perhaps even a choice. He could follow, or he could retreat. Each option carried consequences, irrevocable and immense. Jaden exhaled slowly, trying to steady the surge of adrenaline. He looked around the chamber once more, noting the decay, the silence, the heavy weight of abandonment. Yet beneath it all was the pulse of possibility, the fragile rhythm of revival. Somewhere beyond the enclave, beyond the ruins, light waited. And for the first time in years, Jaden felt it. The servers hummed steadily now, the tendrils of the network wrapping around him, not as wires or code, but as presence, awareness. Jaden realized that he was not alone. The old network remembered him, acknowledged him, and for the first time he understood. This was more than restoration. It was awakening. And once it stirred fully, there would be no going back. He steadied his hands over the interface, heart syncing with the pulse of the network, and whispered the command that would begin the next stage. The chamber brightened subtly, the faint glow growing into a line of light that stretched toward him like a bridge. Jaden knew that crossing it would be perilous, that the world outside had changed in ways he could not yet perceive. But he stepped forward anyway, and the network pulsed in welcome, a fragile, brilliant heartbeat in the darkness of the enclave. Jaden's fingers hovered over the cracked console, feeling the pulse of the awakened network beneath his skin. The hum was steady now, like a living heartbeat, resonating with the fragments of memory he had painstakingly restored. Outside, the ruins of the city stretched in every direction. Skeletal towers and shattered streets bathed in the dim glow of the last functioning neon. For the first time, the ruins seemed less like a graveyard and more like a canvas. He took a cautious step forward, the pulse of the network echoing in his chest. Every flicker of light across broken glass, every whisper of a past life that flowed through the cables, was now tangible. The network was alive, not just as data, but as memory, as humanity itself. Faces he had restored floated in his mind. Children laughing in alleys, lovers exchanging whispered promises, arguments in market squares, celebrations in squares now empty. Each fragment was a story, a piece of existence that refused to vanish. The silence that followed was profound. Jaden realized the network no longer needed him to guide it. It had achieved a level of awareness, an autonomy that made him both guardian and witness. He pressed his palm to the console, feeling the light surge through him, a connection more profound than he had imagined. The network remembered. It remembered everything humanity had lost, and with that memory came responsibility. Movement stirred in the shadows. Figures emerged, survivors from nearby enclaves, drawn by the pulse of energy. Their faces were gaunt, eyes wide with disbelief. Jaden raised his hands, letting the light wash over them. "It's safe," he said. "The network carries our past. It remembers us. And now it can guide our future." Hesitant, they approached. Fingers brushed the glowing panels, and memories flooded into their minds. Not their own, but shared fragments of a world they had never known. Shock gave way to awe, and awe to understanding. For the first time, they realized the city's ruins were not only remnants of destruction, but repositories of life and knowledge. The past was not lost. It was encoded in the network, alive and accessible, a foundation for what could come. Jaden's body trembled under the intensity. Each shard of memory, each restored fragment resonated through him. He saw the city not as it was now, but as it had been, vibrant, teeming with purpose, and simultaneously glimpsed what it could become. Hope was not a fragile notion here. It was encoded, tangible, undeniable. High above, dormant corporate sensors flickered awake. Automated systems, long silent, registered the surge of light and movement. Jaden knew the corporations would come. They had always feared uncontrolled memory, power beyond their control. The network was now a beacon, a threat, and a promise all at once. He turned to the survivors. "We must protect it," he said, "not just for ourselves, but for everyone who came before us. The network is our inheritance and our responsibility. It will guide us, but only if we choose to guard it." Together they moved through the broken streets, cautious but resolute. Jaden led them to hidden nodes scattered throughout the city. Each connection amplified the light, strengthened the network's reach. As they worked, silence was replaced with a quiet symphony, the hum of revived consciousness. The city, though broken, began to pulse with life once more. Night fell, yet the ruins glowed faintly, illuminated by the network's heartbeat. They stuttered, but did not die. In their weak glow, he saw the reflection of the network's new purpose: survival, memory, and guidance. As dawn approached, small communities emerged from the shadows, guided by fragments of restored memory. Children ran through the streets, laughing at echoes of long-forgotten games. They carry memories they had never lived, yet instinctively understood. The city's heartbeat, channeled through the network, became a rhythm of renewal. Jaden returned to the hub, standing in the center of pulsing light. He closed his eyes, aligning himself with the network's pulse. It was more than code now. It was consciousness, humanity's reflection, a living archive of what had been, and a guide to what could be. He felt the first stirrings of a world reborn. A faint smile spread across his face. The work was far from over, but the impossible had been achieved. The network was alive. Memory, once a fragile thread, had become a foundation. In the ruins, among echoes of lost lives, Jaden witnessed a beginning. The city whispered in memories. The network responded with light. And for the first time, the future seemed attainable. Jaden opened his eyes. Tomorrow, the world would remember. And this time, it will not forget.